Many thanks for this opportunity to talk with you. I am an American, and my country is determined to treat your country as an enemy. Both political parties work to generate anti-Chinese feeling in the American public. Like the political parties, our press is controlled by China's enemies. Even so, thus far, they have not been very successful. I am deeply grateful that the Chinese government shows such wisdom and patience in the face of vicious propaganda and shameful provocations. It is equally important that China show strength as well. You are fortunate to live in a country that is thoughtfully concerned about the future and takes actions to minimize the now inevitable disasters. I hope that this conference will continue this process. The Chinese Communist Party has been dedicated to building an ecological civilization, a civilization that is different from all past civilizations in understanding humanity as fully included within a healthy nature. The ecological civilization we construct must be postmodern. Whereas all civilizations have exploited nature in unsustainable ways, the new civilization must find ways of locating human society within an overarching ecological system. This new civilization has been challenging modernity for some time in various sectors of society. Today, it is clear that modern industrial agriculture is unsustainable. Much of it is dependent on glacier melt that will be ending and aquifers that are nearly exhausted. It contributes to the global warming that will require changes in where crops are grown and make it more difficult to produce sufficient yields. Some of the topsoil so important for farming is lost each year to erosion and carried off by rivers to be deposited in very productive deltas. Now, rising temperatures, to which modern food production contributes, is raising ocean levels. Salt water will end farming in these wonderfully productive deltas. 40 million Bangladeshi will have to abandon their farms in the Ganges Delta. Insecticides are essential to modern agriculture, but they are also wiping out pollinators. Insects may evolve more rapidly to adapt to our poisons than our technicians can produce still more potent poisons. Poisons ultimately enter the food and human bodies. There are several ways in which our transportation system can be disrupted. One is financial disaster. Strong winds and heavy rains can cause landslides and floods. As ocean levels rise, coastal cities will be particularly vulnerable. Anger about the system can lead to protracted strikes. Food security requires a profound reversal of priorities. Thousands of people are already practicing ecological food production. Their products are more healthful. They do not need insecticides. The land that is farmed in postmodern ways increases in topsoil, which reduces the need for water. These ecological farmers cannot compete with industrial farming in price, since industries are not required to pay for all the damage that they do. The modern way of measuring progress still limits postmodern food production. But we already know how an ecological civilization will produce food. Much the same can be said about the economy. Today, in most of the world, this is controlled by financial capitalism. This capitalism vastly increases the wealth of a tiny percentage of the population. However, it does not increase the productive capacity of the countries it governs. It simply concentrates in the hands of the few what wealth existing in the other places. Even the very misleading way of measuring economic success, the gross domestic product, shows that financial capitalism is a failure. The global financial institutes survive only because they get huge bailouts from the government to cover their losses. This acme of modern civilization is emphatically unsustainable. However, the teaching of economics in modern universities still supports the overall assumptions that favor it. Fortunately, there are economists who recognize that aiming at no other goal than the increase of GDP is unjustified. Alternative measures of economic well-being have been developed. There is a whole community of ecological economists who are ready to take over the teaching of economics from those committed to the dying modernity. Whereas the modern economic order encourages large-scale production in a few places, the new economy will encourage local communities to produce as much as possible nearby. Despite its current dominance, however, finance is little understood. Today, the Western world has shifted from industrial capitalism to financial capitalism. Industrial capitalism, with all of its problems, did create real goods and services. Financial capitalism makes money by manipulating existing wealth. Central to it is interest on debt. Money makes money. Debts grow and grow. It is particularly important that we pay attention to this situation in the West. In order that debt be repaid with interest, the amount of money in circulation must be increasing. In an industrializing society, this increase is typically sufficient. But when the only growth is in the stock market, the masses of people who do not own stocks do not have the extra money to pay their debts. They can only borrow more. This system is unsustainable. Wall Street would already have collapsed if it had not been repeatedly bailed out by congressional cooperation with the Federal Reserve. A financial collapse is likely, perhaps inevitable. As local communities become the fundamental economic units of an ecological civilization, local public banks and currencies are likely to grow in importance. You in China are in a position of great challenge and opportunity. You will, of course, be affected by collapse of the financial institutions because China is somewhat enmeshed in the global system. But in a way that we Americans cannot, you can also be observers of the collapse of this global financial system without being deeply involved yourselves. The world's great hope is that you Chinese can help to build, out of the chaos, confusion, and suffering that financial collapse will bring to much of the world, a system that serves people instead of exploiting them. There is even the possibility that you can move the world toward ecological civilization. That would include new patterns of relationship between communities at every level. We who are committed to ecological civilization like to think of communities, culminating in the global community of communities. There are some tendencies in this direction in recent history. France and Germany decided that to avoid future wars, they would jointly lead Europe into a European community. There was a real reduction of national sovereignty, with considerable power being given to the European Union. It is difficult to imagine a war between nations that are in the Union. Given European history, this by itself is an enormous achievement. If other groups of nations joined other unions, and these communities of nations became parts of a global community of communities of nations, we would have the sort of world order needed in an ecological civilization. The European Union is a great experiment pointing in the direction of ecological civilization. We need to learn from its successes and its failures. In my view, destroying national currencies in favor of a continental one disempowered nations too much and concentrated too much power in the European banks. In an ecological civilization, nations will also respect and empower the communities of which they are composed, and those communities will respect those small communities of which they consist. While we work at all these levels, currently the most important task is to strengthen local communities that are relatively self-sufficient in necessities. If these cooperate among themselves, they will become communities of communities that can survive the crises that lie before us. A world of modern competitive individuals will not. My purpose in this lecture is to assure you that you already know what an ecological civilization would be like. It can survive in circumstances that will destroy modern civilization and its people. Meanwhile, wherever nations are committed to an ecological civilization, most of us will enjoy life more. To realize these anticipations of ecological civilization will take a lot of work. That work is our calling, and it is eminently worthwhile. Thank you.